Hello, welcome to Holding Ground, a show that tackles topics in mental health and psychotherapy for individuals, couples, children, and families. Our goal is to promote well-being by normalizing mental health challenges. I'm your host, Laura Richer, a psychotherapist and the founder of Anchor Light Therapy Collective in Seattle, Washington. For more tips and resources on mental health, visit anchorlighttherapy.com or follow us on socials at Anchor Light Therapy. Hi, welcome to Holding Ground, the show that brings you a little bit of everything in the realm of psychotherapy and mental health. I'm your host, Laura Richer. I'm the founder of Anchor Light Therapy Collective, and I'm also a licensed therapist. And today I am joined by Anchor Light's lead clinician, Ashlyn Graff, who is also a licensed therapist. And today we have a really interesting topic that we're going to delve into, which is consensual non-monogamy. So good morning, Ashlyn.
Good morning, Laura.
Could you explain a little bit to our audience what consensual non-monogamy is and what that relationship dynamic looks like?
Yeah, so consensual non-monogamy allows individuals to have romantic or sexual relationships with more than one at once with the full consent of everyone that's involved. So non-monogamy, but agreed upon, not cheating,
yes.
Not hiding things.
Everyone's in the know about what's going on. Yes.
Exactly. Everyone agrees and hopefully is excited about it. And I think that as societal norms are evolving, more people are exploring these relationships in our practice because they're finding that they align with their values or their desires.
Yes. So this is a topic that, as couples therapists, that we often address in therapy. And we help our clients understand their relationship desires as well as navigate their relationships. So often clients end up coming to us when they have attempted consensual non-monogamy. It's a mouthful, CSM. And maybe it hasn't worked for them or they've run into a few obstacles. And so I'm just curious, have you had clients that you've worked with that come to therapy after they've explored this concept and it hasn't gone well for them?
Yes, definitely. I've had clients who have technically been doing it for a long time, but didn't actually have very clear agreements on what CNM meant to them or what style they wanted to do. And that tended to get a little bit messier than the couples who had a lot more communication beforehand and were a little bit more intentional about agreeing upon the way in which they wanted to do consensual non-monogamy.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I have also come into that as well. Where clients have felt like this is a style of relationship that they were really wanting to explore, that it would enhance their relationship, but they didn't lay the groundwork or have enough communication about what each other's expectations were. And later it ended up being hurtful or harmful to their relationship. So I thought it might be helpful to share a few of the things as therapists that we consider when we're supporting clients who want to address consensual non-monogamy in their relationship. So when you start with someone, Ashlyn, what's a key concept that you consider when working with a couple?
Yeah. When working with a couple, identifying the therapeutic goals and outcomes comes first. So what the goals of therapy are, how to improve their relationship satisfaction, enhance communication, or address emotional issues within that framework. I think more specifically what I might do is explore different styles of non-monogamy. Fears is a big thing, attachment styles and how that might play out when they are exploring these things. If they've had any history of this before, sometimes there can be attachment wounds there if things have not gone well in the past. And for some people, if they're individuals exploring non-monogamy, I would say that looks a lot different than when I'm seeing a couple exploring it.
Yes, that's such a good point. So there is no one set goal. The goal is really specific to the client and what they're wanting for their relationship. And in that, I think also just really clarifying what the definition of the relationship structure is going to be, especially if you're working with a couple who is looking to open their relationship or explore polyamory or swinging, that they're both clear on what each other's expectations are. Sometimes we feel like we know what our partners are saying or what they're expecting, and there's a lot of assumptions that can be made there.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you also mentioned attachment wounds. So could you just maybe tell our audience a little bit more on what attachment means or what attachment wounds might emerge through this process?
Yeah. So we use attachment theory a lot in therapy here at Anchor Light. And this looks at like those kind of more popular definitions of like having an anxious attachment style, or an avoidant attachment style, or a more secure attachment style. So those can play out really differently in non-monogamous relationships, where maybe those styles are like pushed to being a little bit more anxious when your partner is going out on dates, and you need a little bit more reassurance and get more anxiety when they're out on dates, versus like people who feel very secure with each other might not get quite so much anxiety when that's going on. With avoidance styles, I think like the challenge that might be more likely to come up is like avoiding important conversations, avoiding important communication because it's scary, and they don't know how their partner's going to respond. Yes. So like I think that addressing these upfront so you can talk about them and challenge them before you get to those challenges is great.
That is such a great point. I have worked with clients in the past where they did have agreements in place for their relationship, and then for whatever reason they didn't feel safe in communicating with their partner about feelings they had for a different partner or a different relationship they were exploring. And what really led to a sense of betrayal was not the interaction that they had with another person, but the fact that they were unable to talk about it. So feeling really confident to be able to talk to your partner, talk through issues, have everything be very open and honest is really, really key. Mm-hmm. So speaking of knowing, what emotion is going to come up or how your attachment style might be impacted, what kind of emotions do we see that are challenging for people who are exploring consensual non-monogamy?
Well, the big first one that I feel like you always kind of hear from people who are monogamous and non-monogamous are both like, won't I be jealous? Mm-hmm. And maybe not all people are. Some people definitely are. Jealousy is a very normal feeling. Insecurity is a normal feeling. Fear is a normal feeling. So just being willing to talk about those, I think people kind of get this idea of like, oh, if I feel jealous, I'll be doing it wrong. And that's not necessarily true. You're not going to overseed emotions just by being willing to try new relationship styles. So I really try to normalize the idea that like, yes, hard emotions are going to come up. And that doesn't mean that you're failing. And it also doesn't always mean that like your partner's doing anything wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is interesting that sometimes in these relationship dynamics, people will feel as though jealousy is shameful, that maybe means that they're not as evolved as they would like to be emotionally, or they attached some other sort of meaning to it. And just knowing that is a normal part of the process that you can work through, really that comes up in any relationship style, that you're not failing is really important to offer that reassurance.
Absolutely.
So what else do you think is important in a therapeutic setting when we're working with clients?
Yeah, I think communication and boundaries are two big, broad words, but emphasizing the importance of like very open, honest, clear communication, discussing how boundaries are set, maintained, and renegotiated in these arrangements. Also, I think like identifying your individual boundaries for each of the partners involved. So for some people, those might be boundaries around like sexual health. Those might be boundaries around like, if you engage outside of our agreements, that means that I'm going to leave the relationship. For some people, it might be boundaries around like what they feel comfortable or okay engaging in. So I think that's a big word, but those are just like a couple examples of like how it can come up. This also includes considering how new partners are integrated and how existing relationships might be prioritized or might be maintained. And I think with that, like the rules, agreements, and boundaries are something that I like to like delineate a little bit more, because an agreement is like we are both agreeing to do this, whereas a boundary is like, this is what I will do if X happens.
Yeah. These are my limits.
These are my limits. Yeah. Because we don't want to put somebody else in charge of our boundaries.
Yeah. And this is such a great thing to explore in therapy, because sometimes people are not aware of what their boundaries are. Sometimes you don't know a boundary or a limit exists until it's challenged. And so preemptively exploring this in therapy can really support you through this process.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, change happens, right? Nothing is ever stagnant. So you might consider a set of boundaries and a dynamic that works at some point, and then you might realize that something has changed and that doesn't work anymore. And so what do you recommend in those situations?
Revisiting, renegotiating, talking about it again. I think I remember someone who was non-monogamous, like one of the first times I met, and her saying something along the lines of like, I feel so secure with my husband because we've been together for 10 years and I know he'd do anything for me, but not with my boyfriend. And when he gets a new girlfriend, it's a little bit scarier for me. And I thought that was really interesting in terms of like, we really do build security in relationships in different ways, through time, through like seeing people show up for us. So like how that can play out in each relationship might look a little bit different too.
Yeah. Different boundaries with different people depending on the relationship. Yeah. Yes. And finally, well, not finally, there's many things that we address in therapy. But I think another thing we talk about are some challenges related to cultural and societal considerations, and that clients might have challenges with the perception of their family or friends, or even just how society is as a whole views their relationship. And so that's another thing that we help support clients through if they have any concerns related to that, or if one partner does.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody has different ideas of like how they want to communicate about non-monogamy. Some people want to include their families. Some people really don't want to tell them at all. If that is different for each partner and that clashes, that might be a little bit more of a challenge. I would also add in, I think that like, I tend to see a lot of consensual non-monogamy in LGBTQ relationships. And I think that like it's been a part of like that culture for a long time. So like being aware and inclusive there feels really important. And with this, there is like judgment that people face. There might be discrimination that people face. Like you can't legally marry two people. You can't necessarily like write down two people on your tax paperwork. So there's a lot that people don't really think about that non-monogamous people face.
Yes. Well, and we can help discuss coping strategies in therapy and managing those stressors and pressures as they come up. So we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to discuss the 10 do's and don'ts of consensual non-monogamy. Welcome back to Holding Ground, the podcast that brings you a little bit of everything in the realm of psychotherapy and positive mental health. And so today I am talking with a licensed therapist here at Anchorlight, Ashlyn Graff, and we have been talking about consensual non-monogamy. And so Ashlyn, we wanted to share some tips with our listeners, the 10 do's and don'ts for consensual non-monogamy relationships. So let's start with the do's. What are some good practices if you want to practice consensual non-monogamy?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to really establish clear agreements, making sure that everyone who's involved understands and agrees to the relationship's boundaries and expectations. And that is particularly important, like when you're bringing a new person in, don't just automatically assume that they're going to like everything that you agreed upon. Make sure that like you're kind of including them in the process, because this isn't like getting a dog, it's including a person.
Yeah. So you and your partner may have agreed to certain boundaries, which the partner that you're bringing in might not be aware of. And so those conversations need to happen to be very, very clear. That absolutely makes sense. So on that note, communication. I mean, if you're going to practice consensual non-monogamy, what are some things you should consider in your communication with your partners?
Yeah, maintaining very open communication, keeping communication transparent, to build and maintain trust among all parties. And I think this is challenging. Like there are some people who don't want to know or hear about their partners, other partners. And I feel like a lot of the time when there is more open communication, when there's willingness to like build, not necessarily friendships, but just like positive working relationships even, there tends to be a lot more success there.
So what do you think if there is a situation where partners don't want to know about their partner's other relationships? How does that usually go? Or what are there any ideas of how to navigate that?
I would say that I hear that it can go stickier.
Sounds a little more challenging.
Yeah, I mean, if I were a therapist for a couple that were talking about this, I would really want to explore the whys, because it sounds like there is some insecurity there. And I would really want to know why, like what would happen if you saw your partner's other partner? What would that mean for you? What would that bring up for you? And if that is a request that is based out of fear, then like that's something that we could probably work on to create more security.
Yeah, because, you know, having secure emotional connections with your partners is, I think, crucial in being able to have healthy, consensual, non-monogamous relationships. And so if there is limitations on communication, or if there's a lot of secrecy, that could indicate that there's an insecurity that really needs to be addressed so that this can be a healthy situation for everyone who's participating.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. What are some of the other do's we should consider?
Prioritizing emotional connection with your partners, making emotional security and well-being a top priority for everyone that's involved, I think is really important. And that may differ depending on the relationship. Like some people might want more like emotionally connected relationships. Some people might want relationships that are a little bit more casual, and that's okay. But always being willing to like hear about and talk about partner's emotions, I think, is very important.
Yes. And on with that, also, you know, engaging in self-reflection, because your own needs and desires could change. There could be times when you were really agreeable to a certain dynamic, and at some point things have evolved or shifted and that no longer works for you, or you desire something different, and you really want to be self-aware so you can communicate your needs to your partners effectively.
Absolutely. Like when we don't know what we want, we cannot tell others.
Yes, exactly. And the reality is oftentimes we don't know what we want. Sometimes we're feeling jealous or anxious, and we're really not even sure what the root of it is. And so being able to self-reflect, whether that's journaling, going to therapy, talking to a good friend, whatever you need to be really self-aware of what's going on inside of you.
Working with couples in general, I honestly can't even tell you how often I hear that statement of like, I don't even know what I want or need. Which is a little alarming.
Yes, and very common at the same time, because I think we're really programmed to think about what we should do, and sometimes what we should do isn't necessarily authentic, and so that can get really, so then you can say, I don't even know what I want out of this situation.
That's a good point.
So what else are in terms of the do's if you're thinking about opening your relationship or exploring polyamory?
Checking emotional safety. So like in therapy, we define emotional safety as like making sure that you feel comfortable going to your partner. I'll say like, if you have a parent that always dismisses you or changes the subject, you're not going to feel very comfortable going to that parent when you're like in a crisis or in a really vulnerable situation. But if you have a friend that always shows up for you and validates you and listens to you and cares about you, you're going to go to that friend. So like having that level of comfort and safety with being vulnerable in a relationship is so important for this open communication, because it's not going to happen if you don't feel safe.
Yes, exactly. And I think that you do need to be in a very healthy, secure emotional state to successfully practice consensual non-monogamy. Certainly no one is ever perfect and has it all figured out. But if you are dealing with a really heightened sense of anxiety, depression, insecurity, this type of relationship dynamic is probably going to be pretty challenging. And so with that, you might want to, if you feel like this is something that interests you, but you're not ready quite yet, seeking professional support can really be helpful. So even in individual therapy, how can we help somebody who just wants to prepare themselves for consensual non-monogamy?
I think asking these questions, reading books, looking at resources. I have clients who are exploring this and just like aren't really sure where to start. And I'll kind of ask like, have you thought about like the styles you might like? What are the reasons why you're thinking about this? Why does this feel important to you? Like what values does this bring up for you? Because I think a lot of the time, there might be two different ideas around like non-monogamy or polyamory, and one is like it feels consistent with who I am as a person, kind of like more of an orientation of I freely love, And for some people, it feels more like a lifestyle choice. And both of those are valid of like, this is a choice I'm making versus this is the person that I am. But I think that like that feels really helpful to explore with individuals, just as well as like all of the same things I would explore with couples, but putting more context on that individual person.
Yes. Great. I love that. What else? What else is another do on our list here?
Yeah, just being very open to like being adaptable, adjusting agreements as relationships evolve and as people evolve. If we stayed the same in long-term relationships for long periods of time, that wouldn't elicit like the same growth that like we all do in relationships naturally. So we want to grow with each other rather than apart.
Yes. And, that also means ensuring continuous consent. So regularly revisiting consent with all involved parties. And just because someone agrees to something at one period of time doesn't mean that it's always going to be okay with them or that they're not going to change their mind. And we really want everyone to feel respected in that dynamic, even if they change the boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point.
Well, good. So now let's move on. And what are the don'ts? And the don'ts are what we see as therapists, because usually people have come to us when they've been doing too many of the don'ts, and it maybe has landed them in a place where they need a little extra support.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think avoiding using non-monogamy to fix relationship issues. So like if you're not happy in your relationship and you're thinking that adding somebody else in or many somebody else's in could fix it, I think that it doesn't tend to work very well and often exacerbates those pre-existing issues.
Yes. And so a great example of that, years ago, I had a couple I was working with that they were lacking intimacy with each other. And so they thought a remedy to that would be exploring intimacy with others. Mm-hmm. And what ended up happening in that, and it kind of makes sense why they would think that kind of, shake things up a little bit, was that they both felt hurt when their partner was with somebody else because they hadn't resolved their own issues of intimacy, and now their partners were enjoying another partner, and that felt very painful. That triggered a lot of jealousy and insecurity. So that would be an example of when you probably don't want to try opening your relationship.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, and could lead to, like I said, a lot of jealousy, and which is something that you don't want to ignore. So what might happen if somebody really tries to push through jealousy or override it and just kind of ignore it?
Gosh, in Polysecure, she used this term that I really like called primal panic.
Yes. Polysecure is a book by Jessica Fern. That's a great book on consensual non-monogamy for anyone who wants to check that out.
So I think that like pushing through jealousy while you're not getting like comfort or support and just trying to sit in it could cause a much larger reaction. Yeah. It's almost like comparative to when we talk about anger with couples of like, if you're a little bit angry and then something happens again and you're like, oh, it's okay, I don't need to talk about it, I'll just let it go. We're not actually letting it go. Yeah. And then something else happens later down the line and you blow up and they're like, where did that come from? I think the same thing can happen with jealousy. If you're already feeling insecure and then this big thing happens that really pushes that fear out the window, like it can turn into full frontal like panic or really like reactivity that is mean or inappropriate.
Right. And feel really harmful in the end. Absolutely. So what are some other don'ts we want to consider?
Yeah, I would say don't neglect any like core needs that you have. So ensuring that like any emotional, physical, and logistical needs are being met across relationships. And I would add that includes your relationship with yourself.
Yes. Yes. Often people are neglecting their own needs when they realize that they're in a pretty difficult spot and they've been doing that for a while. Yeah.
Well, and just that idea of like, I may have unlimited love, but I have limited time in the day.
Yes. Yes. And that you do need to take care of yourself as well.
Yeah.
Also, I would say we really don't want to have overly rigid rules. Like we've mentioned before, people's feelings can change and evolve over time, and having a really strict structure that doesn't account for how people might have different responses to different things or different dynamics as you introduce other partners, it could end up being harmful. Yeah. With that, you also This, I think, is the most important part of all of this. You don't want to shy away from difficult conversations. So what do you think about that? Why is that so important?
I mean, oftentimes the difficult ones are the ones that are the most necessary to have. And I think avoiding these challenging discussions can lead to a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of resentment later down the road. Also, like when we're like ignoring those conversations about our needs and then blaming the other person when like those needs aren't met or those feelings are not attuned to, you're kind of putting yourself in that situation.
Yeah. And those are the conversations that are rooted in insecurity. A lot of people don't want to address certain things because they're afraid that will damage the relationship, but it's in fact quite the opposite. You're going to damage the relationship by not addressing those needs.
Yes.
So this has been such a great conversation. We need to take another quick break. And then when we come back, we are going to continue this great conversation.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to Holding Ground. I am here with licensed couples therapist Ashlyn Graff, and we are talking about consensual non-monogamy. So Ashlyn, before we close our conversation today, I'm just wondering if you have a few more tips that we can give our audience for anyone who is practicing or considering consensual non-monogamy.
Yeah, I think fostering individual growth, both before and during, is really important. So like practicing personal development, whether that means going to therapy, taking time to like reflect, and like making sure that you're each happy people independent of the relationship dynamics, can lead to like better relationships as well.
Yes. And that's true if you're monogamous as well. That's true for everybody. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What else?
Validating all emotions. I hate the idea that there are bad emotions. Like emotions are something that are neutral. So we want to acknowledge and address the emotional experiences of all partners and validate feelings as legitimate and important, even if they're hard.
Yeah. And as we mentioned earlier in the episode, difficult emotions are not bad. They just are neutral, and you're going to experience jealousy. Very likely. It doesn't mean you're not an evolved person or you're not qualified to explore this type of relationship dynamic. It just means you're human, and that's okay. It's just something to work through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would like to share?
Yeah, I would just touch on the idea of like codependence in a relationship. I think that a lot of people actually really like the idea of consensual non-monogamy because they get a little bit more independence in their lives, and they feel like they can be free with their love and their time and a lot. But I think striving for that balance of interdependence where it's like more of an I want you in my life, I want this lifestyle in my life, but I don't need it, or it's not like I will not be okay without these relationships.
Right.
So I think that this really allows for a lot of personal autonomy while recognizing that like as humans, we are also interconnected.
Yeah, so really giving yourself the freedom to express yourself with partners who maybe don't need you to be a certain way, and that you also give them that same freedom, that you're okay with what they choose, what boundaries they choose for themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I am so glad that we got to have this conversation today, and thank you so much for outlining a lot of these really important points in consensual non-monogamy. And it's clear whether somebody chooses monogamy or non-monogamy that the foundation of respect and honesty and communication is the key to all types of healthy relationships.
Yes, Laura, I would definitely agree. Thank you for this important discussion. We really want to support relationships that are respectful and fulfilling at Anchorlight, any style of those relationships. So if you have questions about how couples therapy can support your relationship or your mental health in general, you can schedule a complimentary consultation on our website at anchorlighttherapy.com.
Thanks for joining us on Holding Ground, and make sure to tune in next time for more insights into mental health and psychotherapy. And if you'd like more tips or information, you can visit us at anchorlighttherapy.com. Thanks for tuning in to Holding Ground. For more tips and resources on mental health, visit anchorlighttherapy.com or follow us on socials at Anchorlight Therapy. This podcast is for the purpose of education only and is not a replacement for mental health treatment. We suggest you seek out the support of a trained professional for help with your specific situation.